Software Foundation. I stepped down this summer, but I was the director for 2 years. I was the treasurer for 2 years. I'm still the assistant treasurer, and I contributed to a bunch of different Apache projects. So I also have a startup here that I run, and you can find out this slide and information about this will be on that website. That's my website. So what we're going to talk about is incubating open source communities, particularly about incubating communities at the Apache Software Foundation. A little bit about Apache. So who here runs a website? Has your own website? And who has a website that's powered by Apache? Okay, so yeah, see? All right, cool. But Apache is a lot more than the web server. It's not just the web server. We have a full nonprofit, and we actually have over 60 different projects. The web server is just one of them. Almost 2,000 committers, and actually about 300 members now. Completely volunteer organization. So it's a pretty big group, and one thing that we try to do is really grow open source communities. So what I want to talk about today is about this growing a community. So if you are part of a project, or you have your own little open source code, how are some ways you can have more people participate? So we're going to be talking about communities, and particularly we're going to divide that about which communities, why we want to have a community, what it is about the community that's important, and how we do this. So there's different parts of a community. Typically we'll have everything from the public, who may not know anything about your software, to someone who uses it, someone who contributes to it, maybe does some patches, and then someone who is a core developer. And really what we have at the core are the developers and the contributors. And the idea is that we have a larger community with more people, we can have more sustained activity and growth in the long term. So the community that we're really interested in is, so you have all these people who tend to use your software, and you have maybe a group of people who are developers of it. Now in open source, these two groups tend to be, like this group tends to be completely inside the one. Most developers of open source software are users also. But there's this group also of people who are contributors. They're definitely user, and they do a little bit of contribution. And that's really the people that we want to, that's really where you want to have a lot of people. A lot of times, you think you want lots and lots of core developers, and that's great, but really what you're looking for a lot is a lot of contributors. Because really most developer communities are very small. You usually only have a couple of core developers in a project. And even in the really big projects, it still tends to be by a small number of people. For example, in Apache, we minimally require a project to have 3 regularly active developers, because any Apache project requires at least 3 independent votes for a release to happen. So we need at least 3 people. One example of that is this was on the, this was Apache, I think 1.3. So this was a long time ago, but this was the release. And what we looked at was the number of individuals who contribute the percent lines of code. Okay? So basically we had 15 people contributed a little more than 80% of all the code in this release. So only 15 core developers did 80% of all the work. But another almost 400 people contributed the remaining 20%. Okay? So just 400 people just did this little line and that little line of code. And one reason why Apache, the web server, is stable and is a very good implementation of the HTTP service, and it runs on lots of different systems, is because of these people who find all sorts of little bugs that no one else would find because they're running it on some weird system or they're doing something unusual with it. So if this is a big difference also in a commercial project. In a commercial project, you can only afford 15 developers. Okay? A software company can only afford to pay 15 developers, so they only get 80% of a product. And this is why you see lots of odd bugs in a lot of commercial softwares. They don't have 400 other people just doing beta testing and submitting back code. So that's why you see the difference in quality in a lot of open source projects. And it's these people who maybe they think, oh, I didn't do that much. I only spent a few minutes on it. These are the people who make open source really work. And this is the community you want to grow. Same thing with the Linux. On the 2.620 kernel, 50% of the changes were only made by 2.5% of the developers. Okay? So half of everything that was done was only, half of all the code was only done by a very, very small percentage. I think it was like the top, again, it was like the top, I can figure this out, 20 or 50 developers. It basically meant that there were 700 other people who did the other half of all the code. So those were thousands of small contributions. So that is the community we're talking about, is this group of contributors that we want to grow. Why do we want to have this? In my opinion, community is more important than the code itself. There's a lot of very bad code out there that people are using, but because it has a good community, people will use it. We could name some code, like, I don't know, MySQL, if you ever looked in the inside, or Wikimedia, the actually wiki, if you've ever looked at the source code on that thing. But the thing is, you have a community around it, and that makes it alive, and keeps it alive. So it's the community. If no one's using it, it doesn't matter how great it really is. In the long term,